The French government warns there could be retaliation at home after troops take on Islamic extremists in Mali and Somalia. Kurdish protests. Women take to the streets in southeastern Turkey after 3 Kurdish activists are murdered in Paris. 3 years on, after an earthquake killed almost 250,000 people and destroyed thousands of homes, Haiti is still struggling to get back on its feet. Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu. Thanks for joining us. France is bracing itself for possible retaliation from radical Islamist groups after it deployed troops in Mali and Somalia. President François Hollande says he's beefing up security and ordering increased surveillance of public buildings and infrastructure.
J'ai veillé à renforcer le dispositif militaire français.
I have ordered the reinforcement of our French military forces in Bamako to protect our citizens.
Je tiens à rendre hommage à nos armées.
One of our pilots was killed in the first few hours of the confrontation. I salute his memory.
Je salue sa mémoire.
I remind everyone that France, in this operation, is not pursuing any particular interest other than the safeguarding of a nation that is an ally. It has no other goal than the fight against terrorism.
Hollande said French troops and Malian government troops had inflicted heavy losses on Islamic rebels, but he warned that the mission was not yet over. The government in Mali said its forces had recaptured the town of Konna with the help of French units. The French president also paid tribute to 2 French soldiers killed during a failed attempt to rescue a hostage in Somalia. There are conflicting reports about the fate of the hostage, Denis Alex, who was a French intelligence agent. Meanwhile, a diplomatic row is brewing between France and Turkey. That's after details emerged of a meeting between the French president, François Hollande, and an activist of the Kurdish independence movement, the PKK. The activist was among 3 Kurds shot dead in Paris earlier this week. Meanwhile, hundreds of Kurdish women in southeastern Turkey took to the streets on Saturday to protest the murders. On Thursday, the 3 women, including a founding member of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, were found shot dead in Paris. Turkey's Prime Minister has suggested the killings were an attempt to sabotage peace talks between Turkey and the PKK. Now to the Syrian civil war, and the violence escalates. The country's cities and towns have been divided up by the myriad factions fighting for control. Crossing through checkpoints from one hostile zone to another can prove hazardous, as CCTV's Stephanie Fried has been finding out.
This is what it's like to move between opposition and government-held districts of Aleppo. It's the front line of Syria's urban war, where the sides face off, taking up positions in hidden alleys and on side streets. Opposition soldiers man checkpoints, but that doesn't protect against clandestine snipers in surrounding buildings.
From the point that I'm standing here, people scurry back and forth between government versus FSA-controlled areas of the city. There's rampant sniper fire. People go across very quickly.
Despite danger and fear of being sniped or caught in crossfire, some make their way between the 2 districts every day.
I have to come. My sister lives on this side and I have to see her. She's all I've got.
Opposition fighters see their role as battling to take hold of more urban areas, but civilians whose lives have been irreparably scarred are weary of the fight and the danger.
I blame both sides. The government for shelling and opposition for not having weapons. This is a civilian area.
With no negotiated solution between the sides in sight, this remains the reality for Aleppo's residents who are trying to survive against the odds. Stephanie Fried, CCTV, Aleppo, Syria.
There are reports the Democratic People's Republic of Korea may be about to conduct another satellite launch test later this month. That's according to the country's embassy in Beijing. Pyongyang successfully launched a long-range rocket in defiance of international warnings in December. The Republic of Korea's intelligence service has stepped up surveillance in the area. Pollution in Beijing has soared past what the World Health Organization considered the danger level. Weather forecasters in China say recent rains and little wind is increasing pollution levels in at least 4 cities across the country. The bad weather is expected to continue. The haze has caused traffic problems because of low visibility. The Beijing Environmental Protection Bureau is warning people to stay indoors after widespread haze reached the capital on Thursday night. Somber commemorations are being held in Haiti this weekend to mark the 3rd anniversary of the earthquake that devastated the country. Almost 250,000 people died and thousands of homes destroyed in the disaster. The recovery has been slow and painful, and there has been little progress on long-term reconstruction. On Saturday, President Michel Martelly presided over a simple wreath-laying ceremony near a mass burial site on the outskirts of the capital, Port-au-Prince. CCTV's Mava Bambuk reports.
Another ceremony to remember the dead. This year it was a modest affair. After all, 3 years is not a turning point, just an opportunity to take stock of changes around the capital. Traces of the disaster have begun to dissipate. 80% of the rubble has been removed and the capital looks cleaner. Most of the families living under tents have been relocated. Ministries and public institutions are functioning again. Schools were rebuilt and have reopened. Today's ceremony is taking place on the site of the former presidential palace. For 2.5 years, the ruins remained untouched, a reminder to the world of the disaster of January 12, 2010. A few months ago, the palace was completely destroyed. All that is left is this pile of rubble you can see here. And with the palace gone and the camp across the street gone too, the people can now move on. However, the 347,000 Haitians still living in tent camps may not move on yet. On the eve of the anniversary, President Martelly said he couldn't put a time frame on their relocation.
It's very costly. Just to remove people out of 6 camps, to relocate them in 16 neighborhoods, it costed about $98 million.
And when asked how the money pledged to Haiti's reconstruction was spent, a bit of a taboo here, he had someone else to blame.
Only 1/3 of the money pledged to Haiti was delivered. Just over 1/3. And only 1/3 of this amount was delivered to the Haitian treasury. The rest was spent by NGOs.
Martelly announced he would soon propose a new law imposing construction standards on private home builders. As Haitians take it upon themselves to rebuild their houses, the authorities want to prevent another catastrophe. Mava Bambuk, CCTV, Port-au-Prince.
Health officials in the U.S. say the worst flu epidemic in a decade has now spread to 47 of the 50 states. The governor of New York has declared a public health emergency. Medical officials are recommending flu jabs, but some states have reportedly run out of one type of vaccine that's used mainly for children. After last month's U.S. school shooting, when 20 first-grade children were killed, a Texas father decided to take school safety into his own hands. Police say the 44-year-old walked to his child's elementary school, told a guard he was a gunman, then walked into the school's office. The man never showed a weapon, but was trying to prove a point. He now faces 3rd-degree felony charges for making a terrorist threat. The United States has the world's biggest prison population, with more than 2 million people incarcerated. Critics say the American criminal justice system is harsh and needs to change. And prison reform advocate John Mackey says it's hard for ex-convicts to reintegrate into society.
One of the most important things of any form of punishment is that it should enable someone to come back. It should enable someone to reintegrate. In the United States, all across our country, we brand people. If people have a criminal record, that will follow them on job applications, on housing loans, small business loans, school applications, and it makes it very difficult to become a free, productive citizen again. That's a big part of why we have such a huge system, a huge dysfunctional system. So I think laws that would take aim at that would enable someone to come back from prison, to lose the stigma of a conviction, that would do a lot.
And you can watch that full interview with Mike Walter on tonight's episode of The Heat. That's right after this newscast. Time right now for a break, but still ahead, Venezuela after Chavez. Speculation mounts in the country on whether the cancer-stricken leader will be able to return to office. We'll take a closer look at the legacy of the controversial leader. That's next. Plus, we'll go underground as the oldest commuter train in Latin America makes its final trip. Welcome back. Argentina's president says she has visited the family of Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez in Cuba on Saturday. Cristina Fernandez Kirchner says she met with Chavez's relatives but did not mention Chavez directly. She also asked reporters to show Chavez and his family respect as he recovers from his 4th cancer operation. Fernandez was in Cuba to discuss bilateral issues before heading to Asia. Chavez has not been seen or heard from since December 11th. Now, some economists predict that the Venezuelan economy could be hard hit in 2013. Currency controls and reductions in spending could be the major causes. But on the streets of Caracas, people say life is better than ever. CCTV's Kaylin Ford reports.
In Venezuela, socialism is king, at least for half the population. And socialist President Hugo Chavez is beloved by the poor for his social projects. Through his various initiatives, Chavez has helped poor Venezuelans with basic needs like housing. These buildings have been expropriated by the government and people have moved in. Some say cases like these scare investors away from Venezuela, but others disagree.
People say you can't invest here, that Chavez will expropriate it. It's a campaign by the right to make people afraid. But if you drive around Caracas, you will see new big projects and dignified housing for people to live in.
But economists say these expensive projects have caused a growing gap between what the Venezuelan government spends and the tax revenue it collects.
At places like this one in the center of Caracas, the government distributes food at lower prices. But some in the opposition say that inflation has still made the cost of living far too high.
We have all seen how our currency has been devalued, how expensive things are.
The Venezuelan government controls the exchange rate. The minimum monthly wage is about 2,000 bolivares, or $460. The black market value is less than half that amount. Still, people here say they are able to buy what they need.
People say there are shortages, but that's not true. It's sabotage by the right wing to keep food off the shelves.
Crime is also an issue in Caracas, but the police chief says it's a problem of values rather than necessity.
We see people who have 14-foot refrigerators with nothing in them, or a brand new cell phone they can't even pay the bill for, or a plasma TV when they can't buy milk or diapers for their baby. It's a problem of consumerism and envy.
With Chavez still absent, many here live in hope for his return, so that projects like these can continue. Kaylin Ford, CCTV, Caracas, Venezuela.
Well, joining me now to talk more about Venezuela's future and the legacy of Hugo Chavez is Eric Farnsworth, Vice President of the Council of the Americas and Americas Society. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's unclear at this stage whether Hugo Chavez will be healthy enough to return to office. But if the case is that he will not be returning, which looks increasingly likely, do you think there'll be a smooth transfer of power?
I think that's a really good question, and it's a very important question. I mean, at the moment, we don't even know if he's alive. And the point is that it seems as if part of the reasons why we're not hearing anything from the Cuban government or the Venezuelan government is because they are trying to pre-cook or predetermine a transition to the next leader who would probably be Nicolas Maduro, according to their desires. And so they have to lay the groundwork for that transition. Now, according to the Venezuelan constitution, there is a process which arguably isn't being followed right now. And I think that's the tension in terms of, does Nicolas Maduro actually move smoothly into the presidency, or in fact, does there have to be an election that he has to contend for and win before he's nominally named the president?
Right, you mentioned there is a process which is not being followed through right now, and that calls into question the role of the Supreme Court in Venezuela. I mean, one of Hugo Chavez's legacies is that he's left behind a very compliant Supreme Court. Is that going to continue?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in fact, I would broaden it to say that he has left behind compliant institutions. It's not just the Supreme Court, it's the legislature, it's the education system, what Venezuelan students are being taught. It's the national energy company, PDVSA. And these have been systematically turned into supporters of the Chavista elements and agenda. And so that's going to be something that will take a long time to really turn around, to the extent that the next leader of Venezuela even wants to do that. So there's a lot of work that's going to have to occur going forward.
What kind of Venezuela does Hugo Chavez leave behind? When we saw in that report from Kaylin Ford there that, I mean, we had mixed views. Some people saying life has never been better, other people saying it's never been worse. It is an oil producer. I mean, has he leveraged the value of the commodity that the country is rich in to build the country?
Well, that's part of the problem. Some people think it has gotten better, some people think it's gotten worse, and it largely depends on what was your status in life before Hugo Chavez came to power. And for many people in Venezuela, it is better. They have health care now, they have access to education, some of the streets are paved, they have access to various things that they didn't before. But for the majority of Venezuelans, life has either stayed the same or perhaps gotten worse. Crime has increased. Basic foodstuffs are now becoming more difficult to find. Investment is decreasing, and therefore infrastructure is deteriorating. So you get a situation where a lot of people looking forward suggest that there will be an economic difficulty. And one of the reasons why that's the case is because energy has not been used wisely. That's Venezuela's primary export, and a lot of that wealth has been squandered, either for sales of energy overseas at low prices, or in terms of diplomacy, or even domestically used to really give away and build social programs. That's not the most effective way to use that wealth.
Right, so it's been badly managed.
Yeah.
But politically, has he left behind a very polarized Venezuela?
Well, I think you could make that case, absolutely. There was just an election in October. It was a closer election than ever before in the context of a Chavez election. And what that says is that the opposition is strong, it's growing, but it's still not strong enough to beat Hugo Chavez in an election, but it's more divided than ever. And so once President Chavez, who has been a larger-than-life figure, actually passes from the scene, you could argue that that polarization is going to come to the fore, and there could be some difficult days ahead for Venezuela.
Okay. Very quickly, Eric, we're running out of time. Do you see a radical change of course under Nicolas Maduro?
I wouldn't see a radical change. He's going to have to show that he really supports the Chavez agenda, because that's how he builds his political support, by showing that he's even as strong on Chavez as Chavez has been. Okay. So there probably won't be a dramatic change.
Eric Farnsworth, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
New pictures have meanwhile emerged of the former Cuban leader Fidel Castro greeting the president of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, in Havana. The pictures were published in Cuba's official state newspaper that's called Granma. It's been several months since he was seen in pictures or video. That's Fidel Castro. The newspaper said the leaders discussed bilateral relations. Birth rates in the United States have fallen to a record low, and the decline is more pronounced among immigrant populations. CCTV's Nitza Soledad Perez has our report.
Kathy from the Republic of Georgia came to the U.S. 11 years ago to study, and with only $250 in her pocket. She completed her bachelor's degree at Columbia University, was a teacher for 2 years, and while pursuing her master's, she became pregnant.
It was very difficult and very challenging in terms of, not only physically but financially. When you're preparing for a child to arrive, it takes a lot of resources, a lot of new things, and at the same time paying for education at a school like University of Miami.
Her maternity expenses became so high that she could no longer afford a babysitter, so her mom gave up her job and flew from Georgia to help her for a while.
I definitely cannot afford another child.
Foreign-born women in the U.S., like Hattie, are leading the recent drop in the U.S. births and birth rates, according to the Pew Research Center analysis of government data. From 2007 to 2010, the overall number of births went down by 7%, but births to foreign-born mothers went down by 13%, and it all appears to be linked to the economic slowdown. When U.S. financial markets collapsed between 2007 and 2010, the birth rate among Mexican-born immigrant women declined by 23%. Women like Hattie say their main concern is finding a job and keeping it.
There is going to be a recovery of that probably in the future as the unemployment rate lowers and if we see more economic growth, but I don't see we are going to see the rates that we saw 10 years ago or so.
Despite the financial hardships, Kathy hopes that one day she can give her baby Lucas a sibling. Maybe even a sister like the one helping her care for her son. Nitza Soledad Perez, CCTV, Miami.
The oldest subway commuter train in Latin America has made its final trip, much to the dismay of some sentimental Argentines. After 100 years of service, time has caught up with the original trains on the A line of the Buenos Aires metro system. They're being retired and replaced by modern air-conditioned carriages from China. Daniel Schreimler went for one last ride.
This is one of the original carriages that have been used ever since the Buenos Aires Underground train system opened to the public 100 years ago, carrying 170,000 passengers on its first day. Millions, possibly hundreds of millions of journeys have been taken on them since, from the Plaza de Mayo right in the heart of the capital, originally to Plaza Miserere and now to Carabobo, with 2 new stations being added shortly. There is nothing automatic, there is nothing electrical about these doors, they are fully manual. And here we are in Alberti station. 95 carriages were manufactured by La Bourgeois Company of Belgium. Spare parts are no longer available, but the wagons still suffer fewer breakdowns than their more modern equivalents. The 10.7-kilometre long Line A, which now carries 216,000 passengers each day, is closing this weekend for 2 months to allow vital remodelling work to accommodate the modern replacement carriages, 45 from China and another 25 from Italy. The Buenos Aires metro system now boasts 5 more lines stretching to all corners of the city, but it's hoped that at least some of these beautiful original carriages will be preserved on a tourist line. Taking Line A of the Buenos Aires subway system is like going back in time, a whole century to be exact. But everything has its time, and sadly, it's now up for the 100-year-old Belgian train carriages. Daniel Schreimler, CCTV, Buenos Aires.
We are going to take a break right now, but still ahead, one of Hollywood's historic landmarks, known for hosting various red carpet affairs, is getting a facelift by a well-known Chinese electronic company. Details of the big changes at Grauman's Chinese Theatre. That's up next. Welcome back. Grauman's Chinese Theatre in Hollywood has been a major landmark for 85 years. Now it's getting a new name. The Chinese TV maker TCL has paid more than $5 million for the naming rights. Yakenda Magahi has details.
In the 86 years since its inception, the historic Grauman's Chinese Theatre annually premieres some of the biggest hits that Hollywood has ever produced.
Many of the Academy Award nominees premiered here this year, including Life of Pi and Lincoln, 2 of the most nominated films.
Hosted some of the most famous movie stars that ever lived.
In the early days, the golden age of Hollywood, a man named Sid Grauman opens his Chinese-themed theater. The theater was an instant sensation. Crowds would gather to see movie stars have their prints set into the concrete floor.
Indeed, it was Sid Grauman who first conceived the idea of red carpet rollouts at film premieres, announcements, and celebrity events. He's been called the greatest showman in the world, so it's no surprise that a big announcement at his own Grauman Theater was full of pomp and circumstance.
3, 2, 1.
But this old iconic landmark is getting a new facelift, a bit of cosmetic surgery.
It's about to get a new name, all new upgrades and technologies, and an all-new lease on life as we partner with one of China's most formidable consumer product companies, TCL.
That corporation, TCL, is a household brand name in China.
TCL, as a symbolic icon of made in China, has grown from a Chinese local company to a global leading brand in the consumer electronic industry.
Now it hopes to grow into a big player in the entertainment industry, and Hollywood is the perfect start.
TCL has enjoyed many very close relationship or cooperations with Hollywood entertainment industry in the past years, and today's naming also shows its continuous commitment of its globalization and also branding, and it also demonstrates clearly that TCL has full confidence in U.S. economy
and full confidence in the continued growth and success of the Chinese theater. Yakenda McGahee, CCTV, Los Angeles.
Now, it's not a record you hear of very often, but 1,600 students in India have made the longest, or largest rather, human torch formation on Saturday, breaking the previous Guinness record. The feat marks the 150th birthday of a famous Hindu philosopher, Swami Vivekananda. The formation was 186 feet long. And that is our newscast for this evening. Retaliation from radical Islamist groups after it deployed troops in Mali and Somalia. President François Hollande says he's beefing up security and ordering increased surveillance of public buildings and infrastructure.
J'ai veillé à renforcer le dispositif militaire français.
I have ordered the reinforcement of our French military forces in Bamako to protect our citizens.
Je tiens à rendre hommage à nos armées.
One of our pilots was killed in the first few hours of the confrontation. I salute his memory. I remind everyone that France, in this operation, is not pursuing any particular interest other than the safeguarding of a nation that is an ally. It has no other goal than the fight against terrorism.
Hollande said French troops and Malian government troops had inflicted heavy losses on Islamic rebels, but he warned that the mission was not yet over. The government in Mali... The French government warns there could be retaliation at home after troops take on Islamic extremists in Mali and Somalia. Kurdish protests. Women take to the streets in southeastern Turkey after 3 Kurdish activists are murdered in Paris. 3 years on, after an earthquake killed almost 250,000 people and destroyed thousands of homes, Haiti is still struggling to get back on its feet. Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu. Thanks for joining us. France is bracing itself for possible... Now to the Syrian civil war, and the violence escalates. The country's cities and towns have been divided up by the myriad factions fighting for control. Crossing through checkpoints from one hostile zone to another can prove hazardous, as CCTV's Stephanie Freed has been finding out.
This is what it's like to move between opposition and government-held districts of Aleppo. It's the front line of Syria's urban war, where the sides face off, taking up positions in hidden alleys and on side streets. Opposition soldiers man checkpoints, but that doesn't protect against clandestine snipers in surrounding buildings.
From the point that I'm standing here, people scurry back and forth between government versus FSA.
It said its forces had recaptured the town of Kona with the help of French units. The French president also paid tribute to 2 French soldiers killed during a failed attempt to rescue a hostage in Somalia. There are conflicting reports about the fate of the hostage, Denis Alex, who was a French intelligence agent. Meanwhile, a diplomatic row is brewing between France and Turkey. That's after details emerged of a meeting between the French president, François Hollande, and an activist of the Kurdish independence movement, the PKK. The activist was among 3 Kurds shot dead in Paris earlier this week. Meanwhile, hundreds of Kurdish women in southeastern Turkey took to the streets on Saturday to protest the murders. On Thursday, the 3 women, including a founding member of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, were found shot dead in Paris. Turkey's Prime Minister has suggested the killings were an attempt to sabotage peace talks between Turkey and the PKK.
Controlled areas of the city, there's rampant sniper fire. People go across very quickly.
Despite danger and fear of being sniped or caught in crossfire, some make their way between the 2 districts every day.
I have to come. My sister lives on this side and I have to see her. She's all I've got.
Opposition fighters see their role as battling to take hold of more urban areas, but civilians whose lives have been irreparably scarred are weary of the fight and the danger.
I blame both sides, the government for shelling and opposition for not having weapons. This is a civilian area.
With no negotiated solution between the sides in sight, this remains the reality for Aleppo's residents who are trying